Chapter 12. The Land Abdullah and the Sea Abdullah. As Scheherazade finished the story of the Keys of Destiny, a silence fell between her and her husband and separated their two hearts. Through the windows of his eyes, Scheherazade saw King Shahyar's heart turn away and dress itself in the hard armor of hate, and she was afraid for her life. "What a fine name the hero of that story had," she said aloud. "If I were a man, I would wish my parents had called me that. Mohammed? Surely there is no better name than the name of Allah's prophet." "Oh, you have shown again my female foolishness," she said, "for I meant the name Abdullah, servant of Allah." "Indeed, Scheherazade, it is a common enough name, and I wish that all children who are named Abdullah by their parents grew up to be true servants of Allah." "Yes, my devout and prayerful husband. Then indeed there would be reason to rejoice if every man in Sasan were called Abdullah. Does that not put you in mind of the land Abdullah and the sea Abdullah in the story of that name?" "Is the story written in the libraries of Sasan? I have never heard of it. Were the land Abdullah and the sea Abdullah true servants of Allah worthy of their names? The king would judge for himself if he could spare his worthless wife's life for one more night and hear the story." So, on the 274th night, Scheherazade began. The story is carried, but who can tell if it is true, of a poor young fisherman called Abdullah, who was a true believer in Allah and his prophet. He had heard it said that Allah will provide for tomorrow, so every day he spent all the money he earned. On a day when the fish were shoaling in the surf, he earned many dinars, ate like a king, and saved nothing at all. On the days when fish were sleeping on the seabed, he caught little, earned next to nothing, and ate even less. Then his friend the baker would see Abdullah standing outside his shop trying to fill his stomach with the smell of fresh bread, and he would give him a bag of hot sesame buns, for his heart was as large and warm as a freshly baked loaf. "You are Abdullah the fisherman, and I am Abdullah the baker," he would say. "If one Abdullah cannot help another, he is no true servant of Allah and does not deserve his name." One day Abdullah the fisherman cast his net and needed all his strength to pull it in. Caught in the mesh, and emerging little by little from the water, was a man. Yes, surely a man, with a head, shoulders, arms, a chest, a waist, and a tail. "A tail?" thought Abdullah. "This is no man. This is a jinni like the one who was thrown into the sea inside a copper bottle," and he dropped the net, hitched up his robe, and ran away. "Wait, friend! Please help me get free of this net, or I shall certainly drown in the sunshine," called the fisherman. "You're a jinni, and there is a proverb which says, 'Allah gives man arms to fight with, but legs to run away, and a man's legs are longer than his arms.'" "So that's what those are," the creature interrupted. "Legs. I thought at first that you had split your tail in two. I promise you that I am only a man and a true believer in Allah, the one God." Abdullah's curiosity pulled him back like a fish on a line to gape open-mouthed at the merman. The creature said, "I am from the kingdom below waves. We too have a proverb. Allah gave man arms to fight with, but a tail to swim away, and a man's tail is longer than his arms. My name is Abdullah." "Allah be blessed! So is mine. So I'm the Abdullah of the land, and you are Abdullah of the sea." He helped the merman out of the net and sat down on the shore, while the sea Abdullah lay in the shallows up to his neck, ducking his head from time to time to fill his lungs with refreshing sea water. The merman described his kingdom below waves and asked many questions about the kingdom he called Middle World, because it stood below the sky and above the sea. "Our legends have always spoken of a race of men who live on the mountain tops above the waterline, and I have often begun climbing the sea's mountains, wondering if I could satisfy my curiosity. Your net fell on me today out of the dry air, and I found that the legends are indeed true." The land Abdullah asked the sea Abdullah what the legends of Middle World said. "They speak particularly of the food of Middle World, for not only does dry man draw up fish from the sea, but he also eats the meat of strange air-breathing beasts, and picks delectable food from the branches of green coral and landweed." Abdullah the fisherman immediately offered the merman a peach and an orange from his bag, and promised to bring a basket of different fruits the following day if the sea Abdullah would come again. "Well, I must give you something in return, brother Abdullah," said the merman. "What can I bring you? There is nothing under the waves that so delights the tongue as this peach," said the fisherman. "But there is much to delight the eye. I shall bring you a basket of pretty sea fruits from the bed of the ocean to decorate your house, and we shall talk together again." When the sea Abdullah had gone, the land Abdullah threw down his net in disgust. What a fool I am! I could have sold this creature to a zoo for a fabulous sum, and now he has tricked me into letting him go. Besides, here I am with no catch at all today, for I have no money to buy fruit for the merman. He can bring pretty pebbles from the seabed, but I must pay good money at the market for food. He went to his friend the baker and told him the story. But Abdullah the baker said, "There's no need to invent this one. One Abdullah owes it to another to see him through the bad times we all suffer." And he gave the fisherman money from his till. Abdullah the fisherman took nuts, pomegranates, dates, plums, and watermelons to the beach in a basket. He felt foolish, standing in the surf in plain sight of Allah and saying, "Abdullah! Where are you, Abdullah?" The sea Abdullah rose from the waves, carrying on his head a basket of glorious jewels, emeralds, diamonds, seed pearls, balas, and opals. "Allah, God of dry and wet!" exclaimed the fisherman. "Ha! I shall be the richest man in the kingdom. Did your fellow men of below waves agree to you squandering such wealth on a poor citizen of middle world?" "Allah bless us! These are the stones I cleaned from my flower beds this morning so that my wife could plant sargasso. There are many millions of these pebbles on the seabed, and they account for the great lightness and beauty of below waves, but they are an insulting gift to offer in return for such deliciousness." And the merman smelled the fruit and splashed his tail with delight. They agreed to exchange gifts every day, the fisherman bringing fruit of middle world in a basket, the merman fetching a tub of precious jewels from the seabed. And the land Abdullah left the beach that day as cheerful as the sheik in the old story who grasped the key of happiness and wealth. He went to his friend the baker and gave him half the jewels to repay his generosity and trust of the day before, and then he went to the jewel market and offered to sell the fruit of the sea. "Arrest this man!" cried the jeweler. "His clothes are as old as my grandfather, and he smells of fish. How does a poor fisherman lay his hands on jewels like these without stealing them?" Other tradesmen gathered round and kept tight hold of Abdullah. "The queen's jeweled collar was stolen yesterday," said one. "This is obviously the thief." So the police arrested Abdullah, beat him, and triumphantly dragged him bound and gagged to the royal palace. "We have caught the thief who stole the queen's collar," they crowed to the king. "This dirty ragged fisherman, without 1 dinar to drop through the holes in his pocket, was trying to sell these jewels in the market." The fruits of the sea were shown to the queen, who held them up to the light in amazement. "These are much finer than the jewels in my collar. Besides, I found the missing necklet in my treasure chest. Husband, won't you buy these perfect jewels from this poor wronged man and have them made into a collar for our daughter the princess?" The king's anger shriveled the police and the jewelers as the sun shrivels beetles on a hot rock. He released Abdullah and consoled him for his ill treatment with wine and exotic confections, with syllabub and marshmallows, and then he asked to hear the fisherman's story. "I received the jewels in return for a basket of fruit from a courteous, honorable gentleman of the kingdom below waves. I caught him by accident in my fishing net. We agreed to exchange gifts each day, jewels in return for fruit, and we feel almost like brothers, sharing the name of Abdullah as we do. I call him the sea Abdullah, and he calls me, his poor brother, the land Abdullah." "Allah bless and keep you both! You have the same name as me, your king, Abdullah." "We do have, your honor, your majesty." "But you are far from poor, citizen Abdullah. These jewels will make you as rich as your poverty has made you honest. My wife wants to buy your jewels for our daughter." "Oh, take them, sire. If Abdullah the fisherman is not too insignificant a person to offer gifts to a great king. If you will only supply me with a basket of fresh fruit, I can soon fetch more. Indeed, these are only half the jewels I was given, for I gave half to my friend the baker, who has fed me when I had not 1 dinar to drop through the holes in my pockets." The king let Abdullah go on his way, but his heart remarked to his brain that the fisherman was well named, servant of Allah. The poet says, "The poor remember their friends, but the rich forget them." But the rich Abdullah did not forget his friend, the baker. "This is a good man," said the king's heart to his brain. Every day the land Abdullah took to the beach a basket of land fruit, figs, melons, cucumbers, tomatoes, dates, berries, and apples. And every day the merman came with a tub of gleaming jewels, amethysts, beryl, turquoise, alexandrite, and heliotrope. The fisherman's wealth was soon larger than the king's, and he was a familiar visitor at the palace. Seeing that the land Abdullah's heart was to be valued as greatly as his treasure, the king offered the young man his daughter as a wife. The king offered the young man his daughter for a wife. The wedding was celebrated with a day of feasting on fish, squid, bream, and flying fish, shrimp and lobster, sturgeon and crab. Then there was a day of feasting on meat, venison and beef, mutton and sweetbreads. The third day saw feasting on birds of the air, larks and swan, duck and oriole, geese, crane, and pheasant. A fourth feast followed of fruits, and a fifth of delicate dishes, monkey, lizard, sesame pastes, turtle, cream cheeses, and honeycombs. But the bridegroom left every feast during the morning music and carried a basket of fruit to the beach. Nectarines, apricots, coconuts, pawpaw, squash, pears, grapes, and tangerines, and met his friend the sea Abdullah beside the white mid-morning surf. "Abdullah, my son-in-law," said the king, "it is not seemly for a prince of the kingdom to carry fruit baskets like a common porter. Will you leave your bride and guests when the dancing is just beginning?" But the land Abdullah kept his promise to meet the sea Abdullah every day. One morning the sea Abdullah said, "As the eye is more lovely than the mouth, so sight is more lovely than the word. Why do you not come down with me to the kingdom below waves and see its strange and shining twilight?" The land Abdullah protested that he would drown in the kingdom below waves, but the merman fetched a magic lotion with which he oiled the fisherman's body, and then he took him by the hand and led him into the surf. At the royal palace the princess waited, like a heron beside a stream, for the return of her husband. Chapter 13. The land Abdullah in the kingdom below waves. Below the sea, the land Abdullah saw canyons of pink coral and forests of branching octopus. He walked through the wrecks of galleons and orchards of waving sponges. Rainbows of angelfish arched between the seabed and the dappled sky of waves. Icebergs drifted above him like clouds. He saw the foundations of Africa set in the shifting silt, and the feet of towering cliffs and plains where crops of sea kelp wave while the tides are drawn up over beaches. Sunlight trickled only feebly through the liquid air, but the valleys and cities of below waves were brightly lit by the phosphorescent glow of electric fish and the refracted light from a million precious stones on the seabed. Moonstone, zircon, coral, jade, and rubies sprinkled the sand and decorated the reefs, and the fisherman wondered at the value he and his fellow drymen placed on such common pebbles. A farm of open-mouthed oysters, lolling pearls on their gray tongues, marked the border of the sea Abdullah's estate. He led his friend into a large cave, introduced him to his wife and 5 daughters. The babies were munching on raw fish and dribbled bubbles from the corners of their mouths. At the sight of the land Abdullah, they burst out laughing. The little children rolled on their backs, and the sea Abdullah's wife leaned against the wall of the sea cave and laughed until air bubbles oozed from her eyes and rolled down her cheeks. "What's this tailless thing you've brought back with you, Abdullah?" she said. When her husband reproached her for her bad manners, she tried to control her laughing and said, "Oh, dear husband, I'm so sorry. Has your friend split his tail in an accident and bandaged it with that strange cloth?" "She means your trousers, I think," said his friend soberly. "Perhaps she should remove them." "Take off my trousers in front of your wife," said the land Abdullah, appalled. But noticing that the merman wore no clothes at all, he honored the custom of the underwater world and took off his baggy Arabian trousers. The mermaid's wife stuffed her long hair into her mouth. She could not stifle her giggles even so, and swam out of the cave, apologizing as she shook with uncontrollable laughter. The neighbors soon arrived, and a detachment of royal guards from the king of below waves. The king had heard about the land Abdullah and wanted to see if this tailless proof that the legends concerning Middle World were true. The fisherman began to look at his legs with new eyes, for they were so comic a sight at the royal court that the king of below waves offered him a pension for life if he would stay as the court jester. Somewhat offended, the fisherman said, "Indeed, sir, I have a court of my own in my breathing world, married as I am to a king's daughter." "Do you mean to make us believe that such a poor, split-tailed crayfish as you is given authority over the legendary men of Middle World?" said the king, holding his sides and choking with laughter. "What can you do with that forked prong on the end of your spine?" "My legs? Well, I can run and jump and ride horses. I could sit astride a porpoise and ride him through the waves, roofing your world." The king seemed baffled. "Why should you want to do such a thing when tailed men can outswim a porpoise? Well, show us this running and jumping." So the land Abdullah set off to run across a wide strip of fine sand, but the water dragged on his limbs, and he floundered like a bear in mud. The gathered assembly laughed until they fell down like a row of dominoes. "And it would seem that these legs wear out more quickly than fins," said the king, hungry for understanding. "For are they not frayed badly, young man?" The land Abdullah looked at his feet. "They are toes, your royal highness, not frayed ends to my legs." And he wondered why he had left his bride waiting, like a heron beside a stream, for his return. The underwater army were mustered to review the dryman's legs, and his trousers were hung up in the Royal Museum as archaeological proof of Middle-world and its outrageous creatures. A feast was given in his honor, but since no fires would burn in the kitchens of the sea, every dish was raw, and there was no meat other than fish. Abdullah began to long for his native land of roast meat and dry trousers. "Speak, son-in-law," said King Abdullah, "and tell us things of the wet world that we of the dry world have never heard. How were you received by the mermen and mermaids? Did they wish that Allah had made them land creatures with legs and lungs to climb up on the dry land and enjoy the fruits of the sun?" "Must I speak about it?" said the fisherman prince, shuffling his feet. The king leaned out of his throne and peered into his son-in-law's face. "What's this? The tongue that fails to speak says more than a book. What monstrous beast did you see?" "Oh, I saw a whale who could swallow an elephant without chewing. I saw dugongs who sing like women and lure sailors to their deaths. I saw where the flying fish build their nests, and the octopus which has eight what, son-in-law? You have turned the key of your tongue in your mouth to keep some secret in." "8 legs, my lord, a foolish and laughable creature." But the prince's thoughts were not of the octopus, and the king saw that his son-in-law had brought back from below waves a greater weight of sorrow than of jewels. "Tell me, my son, if the salt-water sea has waterlogged your happiness and swamped all your cheerfulness." "Ah, my lord, forgive me my silence. In my heart are written the words of the poet. The good believer turns aside from all things bad, but chiefly pride. My pride was hurt, father, in below waves, a small and unimportant matter for a believer, but forgive me if I do not add my shame by describing what happened." But the king had an even greater store of pride than the humble Abdullah, and pressed him for the truth. He commanded his daughter to pester her husband day and night until she persuaded him to speak. She called on her father early the next morning. "My dear husband has opened the doors of his silence and shown me his wounded pride." The merman, let it not be told in public, laughed exceedingly at his legs and placed his trousers in the Royal Museum. Tailless man was comical to them, and Abdullah was offered the post of king's jester. When King Abdullah heard this, a great anger swept down from the land to the sea, a dry, hot anger that drove the tides down the beaches and fried the fishes in the surf. He swore an oath which melted the icebergs, and muttered curses which popped the pods of seaweed as they echoed along the shores. "By Allah, who made fish and fowl and raised up fowl higher than fish, no merman will ever cross high water mark or taste fresh water from the inland springs. No two-legged man will ever carry fruit beyond the wet sand line, nor marry a mermaid, nor eat raw fish." As King Abdullah was swearing this oath, Abdullah the fisherman crossed the palace courtyard with a basket of fruit: mandarins, satsumas, cactus pears, cherries, strawberries, quinces, gooseberries, and passion fruits. "Where are you going, son-in-law, carrying baskets of fruit like a miserable porter? Princes of royal blood are not donkeys to grunt under heavy loads." "I made a promise to the sea Abdullah that I would meet him every day and exchange gifts on the sea's edge," replied Abdullah. "What believer would break his word while he had strength to carry in the gifts? My friend Abdullah did not laugh at me, and what good believer would let pride come between him and a friend?" "Remember the old rhyme," said King Abdullah crossly. "A common man should draw the line at being virtuous all the time." "But, father," replied Abdullah, "you married me to your daughter because I try to be a true servant of Allah in my dealings with my friends." It was useless to argue. The more wrong the king felt in his heart, the less pleasure he took in his honorable son. "I have made a decree," he said finally. "By Allah, who made fish and fowl and raised up fowl higher than fish, no merman will ever cross high water mark, and no two-legged man will ever carry fruit beyond the wet sand line. If you meet the sea Abdullah today, all your wealth will be confiscated, and your marriage to my daughter will be undone, and you will be thrown into a prison. Let it be known throughout the dry world that a state of war exists between us upright two-legged believers and the fish-tailed scoundrels who dare to laugh at a royal pair of legs. And that, you see, is why no merman has ever been caught since in a fisherman's net. They keep away from the dry mountain tops that rise out of their watery kingdom and hide themselves in their deep sea caves and keep their treasure to themselves. But did the land Abdullah keep his promise to the sea Abdullah and meet him on the beach? Asked King Shahryar. What do you think, my husband? Said Scheherazade. For you are a judge of people and a student of the teachings of Allah. Should he have obeyed his conscience, or the decree of his father, a great king to whom he was tied by marriage and by affection? A man should keep his promise to a friend before any other consideration, said the king. Well then, the land Abdullah would have pleased you greatly, my virtuous and loyal king, for he took his gift of fruit to the sea Abdullah, who wept to have brought his friend such a sorry situation. Think nothing of it, dear friend, said the land Abdullah. Before I knew you, I had nothing, and today I have nothing. What have I lost? Before I knew you, I had no wife, and today I have no wife. What have I lost? Before I knew you, I had a fishing net and one good friend. Today I have a fishing net and two good friends, and though I shall not see Abdullah the baker again, I shall meet the sea Abdullah on different shores. I am sure that a friend in the kingdom of fishes will never let a poor fisherman starve. So the land Abdullah flung his old net over his shoulder and left the kingdom of King Abdullah to fish foreign surf and to meet his friend the sea Abdullah on foreign beaches. That's a fine story, Scheherazade, said the king, and it has a fine ending. A man could learn a lot from such a story. Did Allah reward his servant for his honesty? That is not known to me, discerning husband. The fisherman carried his story out of the country and out of hearing of all ears. I know that Allah rewarded the 4 murderers for their honesty in the tale of the little beggar. Murderers rewarded? Then King Shahryar thought in his heart, I will hear this story if it has anything to teach a listening heart. For the poet says, a story teaches better than a mullah's sermon ever can. Chapter 14, The Tale of the Little Beggar. From the far side of the desert comes a story, though who can tell if it is true, of an unremarkable town full of unremarkable people. Among them lived a little beggar, remarkable only for his cheerful, friendly nature and his smallness of size. He was such pleasant company that townsfolk would often ask him home to dinner. So Allah provides for his most humble servant. One night the beggar was a guest at the house of the tailor and his wife, who served him a fine meal of white fish. He was part way through telling a long and hilarious story when a fishbone stuck in his throat. He made a face like a red guppy as he fought for breath, but the tailor and his wife, thinking he was clowning, only laughed and laughed until the beggar fell off his bench and collapsed in a heap on the floor. He's dead, said the tailor, putting his ear to the beggar's chest. Allah forgive us, we have choked our guest to death. Allah forgive us, his wife agreed. No one will eat my cooking again. We must keep this a secret. The man may have relatives who will ask for the price of his life. He must be hidden. So they wrapped the little beggar in a blanket, and the tailor's wife picked him up, for he was no bigger than a child. Oh, woe, little child of mine, don't fret, she said. We'll soon make you well. In this way they walked down the street, and whenever they saw a neighbor or passer-by, they called out, Are you a doctor, sir? Our child is ill with smallpox. The neighbors kept as distant as a ship keeps from a sandbank. A maidservant came toward them, and they called out, Where can we find a doctor? Our child has smallpox. The maidservant backed away, but then she called out to them, My master is a doctor. Follow me, and I'll lead you to his house. The tailor and his wife were obliged to follow, but when she went up the outside staircase to tell the doctor they were coming, they quickly carried the body to the top of the stairs and left it sitting on the second step. Then, taking their blanket, they ran home, locked the doors of the house, thinking themselves safe. The doctor, hearing that a patient was waiting in the street, hurried to attend to them. At the top of the stairs, he tripped over the body of the little beggar, which unbalanced and toppled down the steps with much flying of arms and flailing of legs. The doctor rushed to examine the body. Oh! Allah forgive me! This poor little fellow was sheltering on my staircase, and I've pushed him to his death. The maidservant came out, hearing the noise, and she held her head in horror. Patients come to a doctor to be healed, she said. This man came to your house well and leaves dead. What will become of your reputation as a doctor? Perhaps this little beggar has relatives who will demand blood money. We must hide this accident. The maidservant suggested that they throw the body over the balcony into the yard of the cook who lived next door. "Rats come every night and steal the food he stores in the yard. If we drop the body into there, perhaps the rats will eat it and hide all trace of what you have done." So they dropped the little beggar over their balcony and into the food storage of the cook, who was at that very moment arriving home. "Let me see if I can kill some of these thieving rats tonight. If I put out my candle, perhaps I can creep into the yard and catch them in the act." So, picking up a huge club, he tiptoed into the yard. By the light of the small and unremarkable moon, he could just make out a small figure crouching against the wall. "So it was not the rats after all," he shouted. "There was a human thief to blame for all that stolen corn and sugar." And then he caught the little beggar a blow across the ear with his club. The body fell over, and the face lay down in an open sack of sugar. "Oh, Allah forgive me! I didn't know the strength of my own arm. I've killed this unfortunate little beggar for taking a handful of food I would willingly have given him. What if he has relatives and they demand blood money, or the police think that I murdered him deliberately? Oh, miserable little beggar! Why did you steal the food when you simply could have asked me for it?" So he put the little beggar's body across his shoulders and crept out into the alleyways, intending to drop in the canal. Hearing someone coming, he stood the body down in a dark corner. Since it was quite stiff and cold, it stood up splendidly on its 2 feet, and the cook ran home and locked his door and felt quite safe. The person approaching was a slave who had spent all evening at an inn. Indeed, there was more wine in his veins than blood, and his eyes were floating in sloe gin. Glimpsing the rampant body of the little beggar standing in the shadows, he thought that he was about to be attacked and robbed. He seized the little beggar by his hair, banged his head against the wall several times, screaming, "Help me! I'm being murdered!" The city police, by the light of their torches and the sound of flying punches, found a drunken slave beating a harmless little beggar as though he were an old carpet. The poor little man put up no defense and did not land a single punch. When, on closer inspection, the beggar proved to be dead, the slave was dragged to the public court in the town square and tried for murder. The body of the little beggar was brought and laid on the judge's bench. The judge, who was a good believer and never touched alcoholic drink, quickly decided that the drunken slave was guilty. The slave swore an oath that he would never again touch drink, since it had made him do such a dreadful thing. "You might have saved yourself an oath, you pickled rascal," said the judge, "for you will not touch liquor again, whether you swear it or not. I am going to hang you immediately." A scaffold was built in the town square, and the miserable slave was blindfolded, while the judge's clerk read out his crime. "This drunken slave is to be hanged to pay for the life of a little beggar of name unknown, whom he foully beat to death in the alleyway of the Casbah last night while in a state of great drunkenness." The crowd said, "Hurrah!" and "Boo!" as is the way of crowds. "Stop! Stop! This cannot be," said a voice in the crowd. "The ghost of this miserable slave would sour all my cooking and flatten all my cakes, and I should never sleep another peaceful night." "I killed the little beggar when I found him stealing sugar from my yard," said the cook, stepping forward. "I killed him with this club." "So big a club for so little a crime," said the judge. "Will Allah be merciful to you when you show no mercy to a little beggar? Free the slave at once and hang this cook." So the cook mounted the scaffold and was blindfolded, while the judge's clerk proclaimed his crime. "This cook is to be hanged to pay for the life of a little beggar of name unknown, whom he killed for the small crime of stealing sugar and for his efforts to hide his guilty secret." The crowd drew one breath, as is the way with crowds. "Stop! Stop! This cannot be," said a voice in the crowd. "The ghost of this poor cook would make my hands tremble too much to practice my medicine, and I should never sleep another peaceful night. I killed the little beggar by kicking him down my outside staircase," said the doctor, stepping forward. "I dropped the body over the balcony into the cook's yard, hoping that the rats would eat it and no one would know of my crime." "Is it the gracious act of a rich believer to kick a poor believer down his outside staircase?" said the judge. "Since you earn your living by preserving life, you have earned your death by the death of this little beggar. Free the cook at once and hang this doctor." So the doctor mounted the scaffold and was blindfolded, while the judge's clerk proclaimed his crime. "This doctor is to be hanged to pay for the life of the little beggar of name unknown, whom he kicked down the outside staircase of his house for no very good reason, and for his efforts to hide his guilty secret." The crowd said, "Would you believe it?" to one another, as is the way of crowds. "Stop! Stop! This cannot be," said a voice in the crowd. "The ghost of this doctor would haunt my tailor's shop until I pricked myself with 1,001 pins, and I should never sleep another peaceful night. Last night the beggar came to dinner and choked on a fishbone and died," said the tailor, stepping forward. "I And my wife killed the little fellow, though he was a guest in our house and though he was halfway through a long and hilarious story." "Strange hospitality to offer your guest," said the judge. "No laughter now for you who stopped the little beggar from finishing his joke. Free the doctor at once and hang the tailor. Allah, judge of judges, what a large number of killings to account the death of one so small." So the tailor mounted the scaffold and was blindfolded, while the judge's clerk proclaimed his crime. "This tailor is to be hanged to pay for the life of a little beggar of name unknown, whom he choked to death with a fishbone, and for his efforts to hide his guilty secret." But the crowd had gone home, as is the way with crowds. "Wait, wait," said the doctor, stepping forward. "Oh, no," said the judge. "I forbid you to confess twice to the same murder. Hang the tailor before I decide to hang everyone connected with this death." "But there has not been a death," said the doctor, who was standing beside the judge's bench. "This body is still breathing." Truly, the sheet over the little beggar's face was rising and falling as gently as the surface of a puddle disturbed by one drop of water. The doctor opened his instrument bag and sprinkled a colored pepper onto the beggar's face. The little corpse sneezed several times, sat up, and spat out a large flat fishbone. So the doctor's reputation was saved. "Allah bless me and keep me," said the corpse. "I feel as though I had been thrown downstairs, hit over the head with a club, and beaten against a wall like a carpet." Then, catching sight of the tailor and his wife among the witnesses in the court, he said, "Ah, my hospital host, now I remember. Allah bless you and your house for fetching so many people to help remove one small fishbone. I seem to have caused a great many people a remarkable inconvenience. Perhaps I can repay you all by finishing the story I began at the house of the tailor last night. If I could just remember which one it was." "It was the story of the ox, the donkey, and the farmer," said the tailor, helping the little beggar down off the judge's bench. "And we would be honored to hear it from beginning to end." So the little beggar sat down in the middle of the courtroom floor and began the story of the ox, the donkey, and the farmer. Chapter 15. The Ox, the Donkey, and the Farmer. A farmer kept 2 animals, an ox for plowing his fields and a donkey for riding into town. But the farmer's legs grew to be too long, and the donkey's legs grew to be short, so that for his rare visits to town the farmer seldom bothered to saddle the donkey and walked there instead. When the ox came in from the fields at the end of the day, his knees buckling with weariness, he found the donkey all sleek and fat and smiling on a clean bed of hay and with a full manger. Smiling was the donkey's only exercise, and so he smiled a great deal to work up an appetite for the 3 big meals he ate each day. "Oh, what a wonderful life you lead, brother donkey," said the ox. "My neck is sore from the yoke, my back aches from pulling, and my feet are full of mud. But you spend all day in the shade of the stable, and your only work is to think and smile." Now the farmer, outside the barn, overheard the ox, and was sorry that his gentle animal was so downhearted. He stayed to listen to the donkey's reply. "Allah gave you a large head, but a small brain, brother ox," replied the donkey. "Listen to me. If those small ears of yours are big enough to hear, tomorrow, when you are pulling the plow, fall down and refuse to get up even if the farmer whips you." "But the farmer never uses a whip, brother." "All the better," said the donkey. "Pant and wheeze and climb to your feet, only to fall down again immediately." "Well, thank you, brother," said the ox. "I do not understand what good this will do me, but you have told me many times that wisdom is measured by the size of an animal's ears, and I will do as you say, wise brother donkey." The next day during plowing, the ox lay down and refused to get up. The farmer did not whip him, but unhitched the plow, waited for him to stumble to his feet, and led the wheezing animal back to his stall, saying, "The poor beast is sick. Unless he's better tomorrow, I shall not be able to use him for the plowing." "You see, brother," said the donkey, when the farmer had gone, "if you take my advice, you will eat no hay tonight." The next morning the farmer came to the stable, and seeing the ox's manger of hay untouched, patted the beast's head. "My ox is clearly ill and can't be put to work today." The donkey winked at the ox and smiled. "I shall have to use the donkey instead." And he hitched the donkey to the plow and worked him all day until the animal's back ached and his weary feet were twice their thickness with mud. "Oh, brother donkey, what wonderful advice you gave me," said the ox that night. "Today I have done nothing but flick my tail to keep off the flies and watch the sunlight trickle through the eaves." The donkey did not answer, for he was already asleep, too tired to eat his hay. So the ox ate from the donkey's manger and left his own untouched. The next day the farmer saw the ox's hay untouched, and again harnessed the donkey to the plough. The miserable animal was obliged to pull all day until his neck was as bald as a vulture's head, and his muscles were knotted like rope. "How right you were to tell me that wisdom is measured by the size of an animal's ears," said the ox that evening, "for your advice was the best advice I have ever been given." But the donkey was too tired to speak a word in reply. The next day the donkey worked at the plough until his ears were limp and the sweat ran down his tail. In the afternoon he lay down on the traces and refused to get up, but the farmer fetched a whip and beat him soundly, saying, "What a pity it would be if this weak and stupid animal fell sick like the ox. With no animal to pull the plough, I should grow no crops and make no money and have to sell this miserable donkey for dog meat." The donkey got quickly to his feet, though the farmer kept his whip with him and after that and used it freely. "All I gave you a large chest, but small breath to speak the truth," he said that evening to the ox. "You told me that the farmer never used a whip." "Believe me, brother, I never saw one in his hand. What suffering you have saved me from, brother, with your wonderful plan." But the donkey only groaned and slept on his feet with his ears hanging down. On the fourth day the donkey thought of a plan to save himself more work at the plough. "Oh, my poor dear friend," he said, nuzzling up to the ox, "imagine my sorrow when I heard the farmer's terrible decision. I hold myself to blame for your awful fate." "What decision? What fate?" said the ox, gulping his small supper of hay. "I overheard him saying, 'If that old ox is not any better tomorrow, I shall have to sell him for dog meat.'" The ox rocked in his stall like the clapper in a bell and bellowed mournfully, "What shall I do, brother donkey? You always told me that wisdom is measured by the size of an animal's ears. Advise me." "Well, brother ox, eat up every scrap of hay, and tomorrow morning greet our master like the young and healthy ox you are." The ox took the donkey's advice, and when the farmer came next morning, frisked around his stall as only an ox can frisk. The farmer patted his gentle ox on the head and opened the stable door to give both animals a sight of the farmyard. "I want you both to see what I bought at the cattle market." The plough was lying along the ground, linked up to the usual shaft, but attached to the shaft was a brand new yoke with a harness at either side. He yoked the donkey side by side with the ox and led them into the field, saying, for any donkey who might be listening, "Who was it that first spoke that well-known saying, 'Though man may have the smallest ears, they're large enough to overhear'?"